नानाको योशिमोतो सन् 1987 को फेब्रुअरीमा जन्मनुभएका उहाँ जापानको टोकियो मेट्रोपोलिटन विश्वविद्यालयमा मानव शास्त्रमा विद्यावारिधि गर्दै हुनुहुन्छ। उहाँले कास्कीको गुरुङ गाउँ सिक्लेसमा सन् 2014 देखि 16 सम्म आफ्नो शोध कार्य गर्नुभएको थियो। उहाँ सन् 2008 मा पहिलो पटक नेपाल आउनु भएको थियो। उहाँको आफ्नो विद्यावारिधिको शोध पत्रको शीर्षक रहेको छ Social Slack as a Technique of Coexistence and Everyday Life Among Tamu-mai, Nepal. नेपालका तमुमै बीच सहज जीवन र दैनिक जीवनको विधिको रूपमा सामाजिक समूहहरू भन्ने शीर्षकमा उहाँले आफ्नो शोध कार्य गरिरहनु भएको छ। उहाँले मानव शास्त्रमा नै सन् 2013 मा स्नातकोत्तर र सन् 2010 मा स्नातक पूरा गर्नुभएको छ। सन् 2013 देखि उहाँको पेशागत जीवन रहेको छ। उहाँले सन् 2013 मा मानव शास्त्र सम्बन्धी सम्मेलनमा अनुसन्धान सहायक, सन् 2014 मा अनुसन्धान सदस्य हुँदै अहिले आएर टोकियो स्थित रिकीको विश्वविद्यालयमा आंशिक समयका लागि उपप्राध्यापकको रूपमा पनि काम गर्दै आउनु भएको छ। उहाँको विद्यावारिधि पश्चात उहाँको उत्तरोत्तर प्रगतिको पनि हामी शुभकामना दिन चाहन्छौँ। Now I would like to give the floor to Nanako. Nanako, you have 20 minutes for your presentation. I will indicate the time when 3 minutes is left and finally when 1 minute is left to wrap up your talk. Please, Nanako, now the floor is yours.
Namaste. Nice to see you. Ngami Nanako Yoshimoto ya nga tongo Japanese koimo. I'm Nanako Yoshimoto from Japan. My English is not good. So I like to speak in Gurung language or Nepali language, but today I will try to speak in English. I would like to thank you all for inviting me here today, and it is a great honor to present at this session with the great professors, Dr. Adam McFarlane and Dr. Simon Strickland. And from now, I use PowerPoint. The theme of this session is the Gurungs in the eye of foreign scholars. The professors, Dr. Ann and Dr. Simon, have been working with Gurungs for many years, so I am sure that they will give us a holistic view of Gurung culture. So I would like to talk a little bit about Gurung's marriage practices, especially based on the result of my research in Kaski and Lamjung. Perhaps it is because I am a woman and a Japanese researcher that I have been able to focus on such marital practices. I went to Nepal in 2014 and studied the Gurung language for a while in Pokhara and then began my field work in Siklis village for about 3 years. About a month after I began my research in the village, I noticed a phenomenon that I hadn't known before. Several of the women in my neighborhood were married but living in their natal homes. Before I started my field work, I had read a lot of previous studies on Gurung, and it said that after marriage, women move in with her husbands. So when I started my field work, I was surprised to learn that married women were living in their natal homes. I asked one woman why married women live in their birth homes. She replied, it's just the way it's always been. She went on to say, we live in the birth house until we have 2 or 3 children, and husband comes to his wife at night and returns in the morning. I also came to a marital home after I had my 3rd child. To summarize her story, after marriage, the couple do not live together immediately. that live in their respective birth homes. And in the meantime, the husband visits his wife. In other words, I found out that they live married life in the form of visiting marriage at the beginning of the marriage. This realization prompted me to investigate the practice associated with groom marriage, in which the woman does not move to the marital home but lives in their birthplace for a while after the marriage. There are two reasons for this research project. Firstly, little attention has been paid to such practices in previous studies, although there has been fragmentary references to them. Previous studies have described Bloom's mode of marital residence as partly local residence, namely residence in husband's house. Some previous studies have mentioned that there is a certain period of time after marriage for the wife to move from her birthplace to the marital home. It has been described only in fragments. In other words, in previous studies, little emphasis has been placed on the temporary nature of marital life, in which couples are separated and the husband goes to his wife for a while after marriage. This has to do with second reason why I think this temporary nature of marital life is important. The second reason is that similar marriage practices once existed in Japan and some areas of Asia. Japanese cultural anthropology and folklore studies have accumulated studies on such marriage practices in Japan. To be specific, they have typified temporary visiting marriage as a form of marriage in which the couple lives apart for a period of time at the beginning of the marriage, during which one visits the other, and then the wife moves into the husband's home. And they have tried to understand why such marriage practices exist, what it brings. I thought I could make use of those studies. First, to understand this marriage practice, we need to understand how to process marriage proceeds among Gurungs. There are two main ways of marriage: marriage by arrangement and marriage by elopement. And here, I would like to explain marriage by arrangement. In the case of marriage by arrangement, the marriage begins with a proposal of marriage arrangement called pressure lever in Gurung language. Then, after the approval of the marriage proposal called Pafulava in Gurung language, the marriage is formalized through the procedure called Purunyaba. After that, the procedure called groom entering, that called Bialahoba in Gurung language, is carried out. And with this, the husband goes to his wife at night. Or if the couple are from different villages and the husband cannot visit his wife at night and return in the morning, the husband begins to travel back and forth between his home and his wife's home for days or weeks at a time. After that, the procedure called getting right into, that called Reshozoba in Gurung language, and banquet take place. And finally, the wife moves to her husband's house with a procedure called Kitsuba, and the couple begins living together. husband visit to her wife begins with groom entering, that is Byala Hova, and continues until couple's cohabitation begins at the Kitsuba. I don't have time to go into the details of each of these ritual procedures here, so I'd like to explain only the key points that are important to understand the visiting marriage. The husband begins to visit his wife after the groom entering Byala Hova. Since the marriage has always been consummated, it would seem that the couple could begin living together. However, this is not possible at this point because the wife cannot enter her husband's house without performing the subsequent ceremony of getting bride into, that is Preshozoba in Greenland. In other words, the ritual procedure allows the marital life only in the form of a visit by the husband to his wife's house, from groom entering until getting bride into. At least in the areas I researched, the separation of the couple at the beginning of the marriage and the husband's visit to his wife's house is not a self-indulgent practice, but a legitimate marriage practice that is accompanied by these ritual procedures. In principle, these ritual procedures can be completed in a short period of time, but in most cases, several months or several years can pass from the time the proposal of marriage is made to the time the banquet takes place. Due to practical problems, such as the cost for the banquet and waiting for an appropriate auspicious day to perform the rituals. Therefore, the wife will be continue to live in her birth home for a while. So actually, how long does the wife continue to live in her natal home after the marriage? Is there a socially determined period of time? I interviewed all the households in the village, and while some said they had moved to their marital home immediately, others had lived in their birth home for more than 10 years before moving their husbands. The length of time wives lived in their natal home after marriage varied from person to person, so it was not possible to confirm any kind of standard or tendency. Furthermore, by the survey, it was found that not only the length of time wives moved to their husband, but also the triggers for the move were diverse. For example, labor shortage in the marital home, building a new house, and migrating abroad were cited as triggers for the move. However, for instance, lack of labor in the marital home can be an impetus for the move, while lack of labor in natal home can be a reason to stay in the natal home. At the same time, for example, some people said they left their birthplace because their husband were overseas, while others moved to their husband's homes despite their husband being abroad. This means that these triggers for the move to marital home are only dependent on individual circumstances. Even if these could be triggers, they are not requirements for the move. There are no common social requirements for the move, only individual and specific triggers. Rather, in the fact that there are no requirements shows the feature of flexibility of such a marriage practice. So far, I have presented 2 points about the temporary visiting marriage among Gurungs. The first is that the marriage practice with wife visiting is not a self-indulgent practice, but a legitimate marriage practice with ritual procedures. The other, that there are no common social requirements regarding the period or triggers for the wife to move the husband's house. Just only depends on the individual concrete circumstances. In this respect, it is a very flexible marriage practice. Here, I would like to summarize by referring to the studies that has been accumulated in Japan. According to Japanese folklore studies, Japanese marriage customs can be broadly divided into 2 types, Yomei-irikon and Muko-irikon. Yomei-irikon is a form of marriage in which the wife moves to her husband's house immediately after marriage, while Muko-irikon is a form of marriage in which the husband goes to his wife until she moves to her husband's house, similar to Gurung marriage practice that I have introduced today. Since Muko-irikon was practiced in limited areas, there has been much debate in Japanese folklore studies as to why such marriage practice exists. However, none of the explanations have been enough. So it has been suggested that rather than looking at these temporary visiting marriage as a result of some cause, it is better to look at what is being brought about by them to understand the phenomenon better. So, what does the temporary visiting marriage I have described today bring about in Gurung society? For one thing, the period between marriage and a wife's move to her husband is a period of moratorium of women. As studies in Japan have pointed out, it is natural for women to be reluctant to move to marital home because they want to stay in their familiar home. After a woman moves to a marital home, she has to build new relationships there. This Gurung's practice of temporary visiting marriage, in which the marriage is completed in stages rather than immediately, to some extent mitigates the hesitancy of women to move to marital home. I understand that the practice of temporary visiting marriage, which I have introduced today, is not common to all Gurungs. Furthermore, in some areas, this marriage practice seems to be disappearing. When I did research at one village in Lamjung, I heard that in that village, the village council had decided that women should move in with their husbands immediately after marriage. In other words, it was forbidden for a woman to stay at her birthplace for a certain period of time after marriage. Culture is shifting in any place, and I have no say in it. However, I would be sad for me if they considered current practice of temporary visiting marriages as shameful in comparison to other ethnic groups in Nepal. If we look outside of Nepal, the practices of temporary visiting marriage also exist in Japan and some areas of Asia. And I believe that each culture should be respected. And as a woman and as a Japanese researcher, I am very happy to come across and sympathize Gurun's practice of temporary visiting marriage. Finally, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to Paul Bahadur Gurung and his family for accepting me as a member of family, and to all the people of Siklis for supporting my research. बाजे पुजुमै अनि मा बामै दाजु बाइमै 안주 난주매 월어월수매 다 나네 단데바드 무 all. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. धन्यवाद.
लेले ओर्से ग्यासाजे धेरै धेरै धन्यवाद नानाको योशिमोतो ज्यूलाई. नानाको सान दोमो आरिगातो ओजाइ गोजाइ मासिता. Thank you very much, Nanako, for your wonderful presentation. It is particularly dedicated to Gurung women, as we can understand. You have made us recall those memories who are now in cities, and those children may not necessarily have gone through such experience, but that exist in villages like Siklis. Your passion about us and our culture is highly appreciated. Now, let me switch to Nepali for some minutes to share a summary of your presentation. नानाको आङाले आज हाम्रो सामु गुरुङ समाजमा निहित प्रचलन बारे व्याख्या गर्नु भएको छ र त्यो कुरा जापान लगायत पूर्वी एसियामा पनि भएको बताउनु भएको छ. उहाँले सन् 2014 देखि 16 सम्ममा सिक्लेसमा बसेर शोध कार्य गर्दा उहाँलाई एकदमै अचम्म र चाखलाग्दो विषयको रूपमा हामी गुरुङहरूका चेलीहरू विवाह पश्चात पनि माइतमा नै धेरै वर्षसम्म बसिरहने कुरालाई उहाँले गहिरो गरी बुझ्ने प्रयास गर्नुभयो. उहाँले सुरुमा एकजना महिलालाई सोध्नुभयो र उत्तर पाउनुभयो कि यो विवाह पछि पनि माइतमा नै बस्ने चलन सधैँदेखि चलिआएको हो भनेर उहाँले भन्नुभयो र यो जवाफ पाउनु भएपछि दुई तीन जना सन्तान नभएसम्म श्रीमानको घर जाने चलन छैन भन्ने कुरा पनि उहाँले थाहा पाउनु भयो. तसर्थ उहाँलाई यो विषयमा निकै चाखलाग्दो भएपछि यसमा उहाँले गहिरो अध्ययन सुरु गर्नुभयो. किन भनेर भन्ने क्रममा र उहाँले यस्तो विषय रोज्नुको चाहिँ दुईटा स्पष्ट कारणहरू भनेर भन्नुभयो. पहिलो, अघिल्लो अध्ययनहरूले यसबारे पर्याप्त खोज र उल्लेख नगरेको, र दोस्रो उहाँले यस्तै खाले अभ्यासहरू जापान तथा एसियाका केही देशहरूमा पनि पाइने र तुलनात्मक अध्ययन गर्न सकिने भएको हुनाले उहाँलाई यो विषय उहाँले रोज्नुभयो. साँच्चै नै हो, मानवशास्त्रीहरू तुलनात्मक अध्ययन गर्छन् र आफ्ना विश्लेषणहरू पस्कन्छन् समाजमा. र जापानको सांस्कृतिक मानवशास्त्र कल्चरल एन्थ्रोपोलोजीले पनि यस्ता विवाहहरूका बारेमा प्रशस्तै संकलन गरेको छ र यस्ता विवाहलाई टेम्पोररी भिजिटिङ म्यारेज भनेर वर्गीकृत गरिएको छ, जसमा विवाहपछि केही वर्षका लागि दुलहा दुलही सँगै बस्दैनन् तर बेला बेलामा छोटो भेटघाट मात्र गर्छन् उनीहरू. गुरुङहरूका बारेमा कुरा गर्दा उहाँले के पाउनुभयो भने जापानमा पनि पाइने प्रचलनमा जस्तै यहाँ विवाह कि त मागी विवाह कि भागी हुने गर्छ र यहाँ उहाँले मागी विवाहको बारेमा सम्पूर्ण व्याख्या गर्नुभयो र जस अनुसार हामीमा प्रेस्योलबा, पौलबा, पुरुनियाबा, ब्यारहोबा, प्रेस्योजोबा, खिचुबा आदि. उहाँले स्पष्ट के पाउनुभयो भने विवाह पश्चात दुलहा दुलही आफ्नो जन्मघरमा केही वर्षसम्म बस्ने भए पनि आउने जाने कुराले वैधानिकता पाउँछ र सन्तानहरू हुन्छन्, जन्मन्छन्. यस्ता कुराहरू जापानसँग पनि तुलना गरेर उहाँले यस्तो चलनलाई भिजिटिङ म्यारेज वा पाहुना विवाह भन्ने नाम दिनुभएको छ, जसका केही सामाजिक राम्रा पक्षहरू र केही नराम्रा पक्षहरू पनि उहाँले औल्याउनु भएको छ. अन्तमा उहाँले यस्तो विवाह प्रथा धेरै गाउँहरूमा रहेको छ तर यो हराउँदै पनि गएको छ. लमजुङका केही गाउँहरूमा चाहिँ विवाहपछि तुरुन्तै दुलाको घर गइहाल्नुपर्छ भन्ने पनि उहाँले जानकारी गराउनु भएको हामीसँग त्यो कुरा पनि सेयर गर्नुभयो. समग्रमा नानाकोबाट आज हामीले हाम्रो हराउँदै गएको एउटा प्रथाको बारेमा हामी मध्ये कतिलाई थाहा भएका र त्यो थाहा भएकालाई पुनः स्मरण गर्ने र थाहा नभएकालाई राम्रो सूचना भयो होला भन्ने हामीले आशा गरेका छौँ. ग्यासाजे नानाको.